Okay. So, hello.
Hi.
Hi. So, my name's Emily, Emily Pickering from McEwen University. And I'm here today on behalf of the little conference that we are holding, titled Afterlives of World Building, The Legacy of Robert E. Howard. It's an online conference sponsored by the Dark Man, the Journal of Robert E. Howard, and Pulp Studies. So, with me today is the man, the myth, the legend himself, Rusty Burke. This is super exciting. I know, Rusty, you've contributed such important work to carrying on the legacy of Robert E. Howard. And today I'm just going to poke your brain a little bit, ask you some questions, because we are really curious about getting to know you a bit better and the work that you've done and how we can hopefully carry on your work and the legacy of Robert E. Howard going forward. So let's just start off with something easy. What does the legacy of Robert E. Howard mean to you?
Um, Actually, I've been thinking about that. I'm not, I don't know exactly how to answer that. I mean, it's important to me that people know about, he was a kid in a very small town during the early years of the Depression and was able to make a living writing for the pulp magazines, even though he had basically no contacts in big cities like New York or anything like that. He didn't have access to libraries. He just, after I had been to Cross Plains, Texas, the first time, I realized that Howard had just built all of this up out of his own imagination. And I mean, he had a lot of reference material to that he'd fall back on in terms of what he'd read. He'd read a lot of history and stuff like that, but he was I think that if he's got a legacy to carry on, it would be really exciting fiction that's based in history and myth. And what was it? I was reading I got a Kindle for the first time just about the time I got out of the hospital a couple of years ago. And I thought, well, I've never read Moby Dick, and it was like a zero cost, so I'll bring it up. Well, it wasn't that I found it boring. I managed to read through the whole thing, but when I finished it, I thought, Robert E. Howard could have told this story in like 10 pages. He had a marvelous ability to compact all the action, and he didn't show you all the internal workings of the character's thought processes. He just took you straight to the action. I've always said he grabbed you by the throat, pulled you into the story, and threw you out a ragged heap after a few pages.
It really does. I read the Shadow Kingdom. It was recommended to me by Jeff Shanks. And I've always kind of been into more of the mythology, medieval type stuff. And you're completely right about the being thrown into the action. It immediately starts with like the the orchestra was playing and there's a parade marching down the street and there's a king sitting right at the end, like you're just fully immersed in it. And I've always kind of wondered where that style of writing has come from because you don't see it super often. People really like to be verbose and wordy when they start writing stuff. And so I wonder if even just down to the writing style itself is part of the legacy and like that tone of voice and that just kind of throwing your reader in and getting to the point, um, and being just really about the action and the pacing. Like it's always got good pacing.
Yeah,
And then I want to touch on another part you said too. He was writing in the Depression, hey?
yeah. From 1920, I get this screwed up, the timeline. He died at age 30 in 1936. So, and he'd been trying to sell stories since he was 15. So do the math backward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in the later part of the 20s, where you had the Gilded Age coming to a screeching halt there
Hmm.
with the collapse of the Wall Street, and then
Yeah.
the country was plunged into a terrible depression.
Well,
So
that makes me
yeah,
wonder too. Yeah, thinking of the time in which he was writing, because I I'm quite familiar with the lizard people and the like not trusting your friends kind of thing. So it's making me wonder. It's got my political science brain going a little bit of some of that mistrust in government, especially given what was going on in the world at the time. Like you said, the economic collapse, World War I happening, World War II in the works. So I wonder if it's a stretch to say maybe part of his writing could have been inspired by world events at the time and really not knowing who to trust and distrust in a government that you thought maybe was supposed to protect you, and maybe kind of inspiring that in writing and making it okay to write about that kind of thing and projecting it onto mythical worlds.
well, Howard grew up on the Texas frontier, and trust in government was not a common thing. And he was very much a populist in his thought processes or beliefs. It was like he believed that government should stay out of my business, basically. And yet government should protect the small guy, the farmer and stuff, because he saw these big Eastern oil corporations coming into Texas, and as he saw it, robbing all of their resources, i.e., oil, and getting rich off of it. And the guys who had sold them the mineral rights are begging for money for a sandwich, you know. So trust in government was not one of his main features. So yeah, he came by that suspicion very naturally, being a frontier Texan.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, because I definitely, after reading it myself, got a little bit of the there's like running jokes about, oh, the government's full of lizard people. I'm like, where does this even come from? And then discovered, like, Dr. Garson was like, oh, have you ever read Robert E. Howard? I'm like, oh, that's where the lizard people come from. So that's kind of why I made that connection. But
Actually, Jeff Shanks has done a lot of research on the origin of the lizard people meme, or I can't remember. I'll have to let Jeff tell you more about that. But Howard didn't come by it by himself. It was
mhm.
floating around out there.
Huh, interesting. Okay. Well, on that note, then, what got you into Robert E. Howard, like personally? What interested you right off the bat?
Um, I was in a religious studies class in college, and right across this aisle from me was the guy who was doodling these wonderful cartoons in his notebook while he was taking notes. And we got to talking about comics and drawing and stuff. And I said something like dismissive, like, "Oh, well, I gave all my comics and along with baseball cards and other kids stuff to my younger brother when home left me. My parents moved to Atlanta.
Mm.
Um, the next class, Charlie came in and he tossed a comic book on the desk in front of me and he said, "Read that and tell me it's kid stuff." And it was an adaptation of the Tower of the Elephant Conan story. And the splash page for it has two panels at the top and then a bit larger panel at the bottom. And basically is like you're starting out above the town. You see lights down there, and then you move in closer, and then you're suddenly in this tavern. And it was very cinematic to me. I loved the scenes in Pinocchio where they would zoom in on the town or whatever. And I just thought that was great. So I read the thing and I enjoyed it a lot. Roy Thomas happens to have done a very good job on adapting that story. And so then I was fortunate that Charlie and I later started a comic book store, and somebody brought in a whole bunch of Conan paperbacks for trade. And so I started reading some of the stories. Well, I had grown up, not grown up, but I had worked for several years in a mental hospital with adolescent males, adolescent boys. And when I was reading the introductions that were talking about Howard, I was like, this doesn't sound like the kind of guy who could have written these stories. And that kind of got me started on the whole learning more about Robert E. Howard. But like everybody else, the first time through, it was like, whoa, these things are great.
It is interesting, like to your point. I feel like we don't see a lot of his style of writing or storytelling anymore. Um, so yeah, like even for me, having grown up, I was born in 2003, not to date myself or anything. Um, but I just haven't been exposed to that kind of
I
literature really. So it was interesting to see it kind of for the first time.
I think part of the difference is Howard was learning to write by writing short stories for the magazines. People didn't write novels much. I mean, there were some people who were making a living writing novels, but they weren't writing these big, thick novels that we get these days, and especially never-ending series of novels. So that was just not something people were expecting. So I think Howard developed that sort of short story sensibility toward the later in his career. He started writing novelettes and expanding in length a little bit, but still, his quote novels, Almeric and The Hour of the Dragon, are very episodic. They could be serialized in a pulp magazine. So he was used to writing stuff that could be started and it could be ended pretty quickly and ready to move on to the next, and learning a little bit about leaving people hanging at the end.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm also curious too. Did you have a mentor or anyone that inspired you to look more into Robert E. Howard, or was it just kind of you and Charlie doing it through your comic books or stuff?
I had been encouraged in writing, and I loved to write research papers in college. So I'm weird, but the idea of looking stuff up and then writing it out always appealed to me. And somewhere about the late 70s, I met a guy named Vernon Clark, and we ended up sharing a house together with another friend. Vernon had an incredible library of weird fiction, including almost everything Robert E. Howard had written. And in his bedroom in the house, like one whole wall was bookshelf and all the books on it. And so he would pull stuff out and say, "Hey, Burke, have you read this?" And he would just keep pushing stuff at me. And he probably was my mentor, of I would say. But then later on, I met Glenn Lord, who was the guy who was the executor of the Howard quote. We all called it the estate, but as Glenn rightly pointed out, the estate ended when Dr. P.M. Kirkendall died. There was no estate beyond that. But Howard's writing was still in copyright at the time. So Dr. Kirkendall's wife and daughter inherited the Robert E. Howard properties, and Glenn was their agent for quite a while, for a long time. So he became my mentor in many things Howardian. And I would just innocently ask him, about this or that, some question or another. The next thing I would know, I would get a manila envelope full of old typewriter, draft pages from old typewriter, clearly. Um, Vern and I published a book of Howard's poetry in, can't remember, sometime in the 80s called The Ghost Ocean, which I was just looking up the other day. And Lord, that thing has gone up in value. Um, like I wish I'd kept a whole bunch of copies, but then it wouldn't be so valuable. Um, but it was a handshake, not even a handshake deal, because it was just Glenn agreeing over the phone that, yeah, he thought he could send us some poems. So he did. And then Vern and I typed them out, and we got our friends, including Charlie, to illustrate them and did a book. So Glenn is my main mentor, I would say, in Howard studies. And after that, it would be Vern as the guy who gave me the impetus and the push into it. One thing Vernon was not was shy about expressing his ideas. And one of the things, one of his fixations was he really hated what Elsbreg de Camp had done to Conan stories. I mean, the difference between a De Camp Conan story and a Howard Conan story may not appear all that obvious to some readers, and there are a number of readers right now on Conan groups online and stuff who are like, they don't see the big deal. But I think Sprague kind of watered down. The pacing isn't as good. He kind of watered down the character and um, some of the prose. So I've never really enjoyed all the pastiche work and stuff. So when I was reading through that original answer series, I would sometimes just skip work that was by another writer and just go straight for the Howard stuff. His writing is what appeals to me.
Yeah, I can see why. It is interesting stuff. And it sounds like you learned from, I would argue, some of the best of the best. And it's great to hear that it's inspired you to continue contributing to the legacy of Robert E. Howard. And, it makes me wonder, what was your favorite contribution when it comes to carrying on Robert E. Howard's legacy? What was, the thing that stood out the most to you that you've done so far?
Probably trying to the editing of the Wandering Star Robert E. Howard Library of Classics, and I did some editing of Howard stories for Bison Books out of the University of Nebraska, and those things are important. The Wandering Star series gave a real impetus to Howard Publishing from the late 90s on. Um, Beautifully illustrated books. And then in 1986, I said, I thought, well, my friend Vern and I had driven up to Cross Plains in 1985 from my then home in Houston. And I'd been just in awe of Howard created all those worlds out of this. It's really flat, barren country. And I'd grown up in East Tennessee where it's rich and lush, and you can't really see around the next bend in the road and stuff. So I could see exotic worlds coming out of East Tennessee, but out of West Texas, I just wasn't seeing it. So on the way back to my place in Houston, I expressed the opinion that other Howard fans should be able to see this. Wouldn't it be great if, and I was like, wouldn't it be great if somebody could buy the Howard house and, turn it into a museum? Fern was like, oh, you're crazy. Nobody's going to come to the middle of nowhere to see a little farmhouse. Well, as it turns out, the first group that I took, bunch of guys, 10 guys from all over the world. Graham Flanagan came from Australia, and Tom Kovacs and Steve Gillardy came from Zurich. And we all got in a van and we drove up to Cross Plains and we met a whole bunch of people there, including the librarian, Billy Ruth Leving, and the li- or, and the friends of the library president, Joan McCowan. They became very good friends of mine well, until both of them died. We were very close. And that got the whole Robert E. Howard days business started. Um, so that's a proud accomplishment is that they have hundreds of people coming to Cross Plains every year to see Howard's house, spend money locally, which is important in a town of 900 plus people. So I love that I helped give a little boost to Cross Plains that way. And Wandering Star got some boost in the publishing department. So
Nice. That's awesome. It's great to hear that you've made so many awesome contributions to carrying on Howard's legacy. Now, how would you like our generation to carry on and engage with Robert E. Howard?
read him, read. He wrote all kinds of stories. Don't just read Conan. Don't just read Cole. His boxing stories are amazing. You really get in there and you feel like you're in the ring and sweat is splashing off a guy's gloves. Um, Westerns, um, detective stories. I'm a little reluctant to call them detective stories. What they are is they're slugfests in which one of them is a criminal who gets defeated. But um, the there's one of his detectives talks about how he'd rather solve a problem with his fists than his brains. And that's pretty much how most of Howard's detectives worked. But he wrote a lot of Oriental, I'm trying to think of what you was going now. They're not really mysteries, they're Fu Manchu like stories. So read all of his work. I mean, read a wide range of his work. Um, I would like for you to get down to Cross Plains and see the museum and see the place and the people he grew up around. I think you'd open up a whole insight into Howard's writing. Like you said, is the realization that he was doing a lot of this in the depths of the Depression opens you up to, oh my goodness, this is incredible for this period of time.
Well, and also he was so young too. Like you said, he died at 30. And he did
Yeah,
all that. That's insane. And such a wide breadth of things that he talked about or wrote about and how he wrote about them too. Just so good. He's so talented.
yeah. He was an avid reader of Argosy magazine and Adventure magazine, both of which were general interest pulps. So you would go from one type of story to another, to another, to another within a single issue. It happens that Howard wanted to sell to those pulps, but he was most successful at selling to Weird Tales. which was a brand new pulp when he submitted his story called Spear and Fang to them. It was a caveman story. And some of those stories are pretty interesting too.
Yeah, he had a lot of cool stuff, and it's great to see that all of it survives today, and even his legacy and still survives. And we've got fine people like you to, carry it on and bring it on to the new generation. And now it's coming on to us to carry it on to the next. So if you had it your way in an ideal world, how would you like us to carry on the legacy of Robert E. Howard, whether it's research papers or more conferences like this, or maybe even something non-academic?
Um, I think the research papers is a good idea. Writing for the Dark Man would be a good idea. It would get you to not only read some of Howard's work, but also to do a little background research on, well, how did he come up with that idea and why did he write about that? And why did he write it this way? And it would get, Dark Man still has a little piece of my heart having started it. I would like it to succeed. And so it needs, and Howard is way overdue for some academic um, attention, I think. So that's why I started the Dark Man in the first place, was I thought it was time for him to get some academic attention and recognition. Hasn't been all that successful getting that, but it's starting to get better.
Well, now you
And
got a brand new generation of us who are interested in it. And I mean, even Dr. Gar said offering classes like to do stuff like this, I think is something that's exciting, and it's getting more of our generation into it. And the more of us that get into it, opens up doors for us to be teaching the generation after us. So Robert E. Howard gets to live on, and so does the Dark Man.
yeah, and it'll be published by, with any luck, some Texas publishers too. I mean, there have been what, two or three biographies of Robert E. Howard in the last few years that have been published by university presses in Texas. So that's a good start.
Yeah, and it's exciting to see how we'll carry it on in the future. And we have awesome contributors, and I would argue legends like you backing us and teaching us so that we can pass it on. So I think we'll have some good things. I think Robert E. Howard's going to get some more academic notoriety, and we will make the Dark Man more prominent, I promise you.
I love this band, the Flatlanders. I don't know if you've heard of them. It was Joe Ely
Mm.
and Jimmy Dale Gilmore and Butch Hancock. But they've got one of their early albums was called More a Legend Than a Band. And I was like, more a legend than a writer,
Yeah, honestly, yeah. Okay, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. You have such cool stories and such interesting lore and such a cool connection to Robert E. Howard. It was really fun getting to know a little bit more about you and a little bit more about Robert E. Howard and his legacy. And it was great to hear some ways that, we can carry it on and contribute to it. So I'd like to thank you so much, Rusty, for your time and for
well,
meeting up with
thanks.
me. And yeah.
Thanks for your time. And if you get a chance, get down to Cross Plains because they would fall in love with you there too.
So
Your
sounds a lot like Alberta. I think I'd fit right in.
enthusiasm goes a long way.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.